close your eyes and drift into the deep, ancient waters. Tonight, you will enter the realm of Poseidon, the god of the seas, the shaker of the earth, and the forgotten brother whose power shaped the world. This is a calming sleep story about storms, legends, and the quiet mysteries of the ocean. Let the sound of the waves and the slow storytelling guide your mind into peace as you sink deeper into a world of myths, ancient temples, and the god who ruled the tides. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it for you? I love seeing where these stories travel across the world. Now, relax your breath, settle into your bed, and let us descend beneath the waves into the story of Poseidon. In the quiet distance, where the sea forgets its name, a single ripple drifts across the surface, so slow and soft that it barely seems to move at all. Yet from that ripple, a story wakes. It is a story older than sunlight, older than the mountains that hold the world together, older even than the gods who once shaped everything you know. Tonight, in the calm dark, we follow that ripple until it becomes a tide. We follow it until it leads us to the one who ruled the deep. But before the tide becomes a wave, there is a silence you must hear. A silence that hints at memories buried beneath endless water. If you listen closely, you may sense a presence within that stillness, something vast, patient, and watching. Something that has waited longer than time itself to be understood. You may wonder, what shaped the god of the sea before the world ever whispered his name? What shadows lived beneath his power? And why do the ancient stories hide as much as they reveal? These questions drift like lanterns on dark water, and they guide us now. Each one opens a quiet path into a truth often forgotten, that even gods have beginnings, and the calmest night can hide the deepest storms. As your breath slows, imagine the sea as it once was, empty of names, yet full of possibilities. Imagine a darkness so vast it feels like a cradle, and in that cradle, a stirring presence, waiting to become something more. Tonight, you will meet that presence. Tonight, you will hear the first heartbeat of the deep, the moment before the ocean found its voice. In the beginning, before the world had shape or memory, there was only darkness, wrapped around deeper darkness. It was in this vast stillness that Poseidon's existence first trembled, faint as a whisper beneath the heavy silence of creation. Though the myths speak of him as a god born to rule storms and oceans, his earliest moments were nothing like the power he would someday command. He began in confinement, in fear, in a quiet so absolute that it pressed against the edges of his being like cold hands. Cronus, the devouring father, swallowed each of his children the moment they drew breath. Poseidon's first experience of existence was therefore not the world, nor the sea, but the suffocating dark of his father's prison. Inside Cronus's vast and cavernous body, time did not flow. It dripped, slow, heavy, endless. The silence there was not peaceful but haunting, filled with the distant echo of a muffled heartbeat and the low hum of despair. Even the gods, powerful as they were destined to be, could not free themselves from that crushing confinement. And so Poseidon grew in that darkness, not in body, but in awareness. He sensed his siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, yet none of them could speak. They were like dim embers floating in a hollow void, each one flickering in and out of half-consciousness. Poseidon, however, was different. Something restless stirred within him, for while the others drifted, he listened. And the more he listened, the more he began to understand the language of silence. It told him stories of a world he had never seen. A world where waves rose and fell, where wind brushed across water, where sunlight scattered like shattered gold on an endless surface. He didn't know why images of the sea came to him, only that the darkness somehow whispered them into his mind. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps destiny, or perhaps it was the simple truth that some gods are born with echoes of their future already pulsing inside them. In the belly of the Titan, Poseidon imagined water, wide, open water that could not be contained by any boundary. He imagined movement, freedom, the gentle sway of tides that no hand could hold still. These dreams became his quiet refuge. They gave shape to his loneliness and softened the edges of the nothingness around him. Even before he had ever touched the sea, he loved it. Even before he ruled it, he belonged to it. But the darkness also shaped something else inside him. A deep awareness of fear. The fear of confinement. The fear of silence. The fear of existing without light, without breath, without possibility. These emotions, buried deep within him, would one day rise like storms. For God's earliest sensations never truly disappear. They linger like faint tremors beneath calm waters, waiting for the right moment to surge. Poseidon began to wonder whether he would ever see the world beyond this living prison. Would he remain a flickering spark trapped inside a Titan's gut? Or was there a destiny large enough to shatter the darkness around him? These questions churned inside him like the first hints of a tide pulling against the shore. And though he had no voice, no form, and no memory of light, something within him pushed quietly against the boundaries of his confinement. Then, one day, or what felt like a day, he sensed something new. A shift, a tremor, a vibration that rippled through the oppressive silence like the faintest quiver of distant thunder. It was soft, subtle, but unmistakable. Poseidon recognized it not with sight or hearing, but with instinct. It was change. It was hope. It was the first sign that the darkness surrounding him was not eternal. For beyond the walls of Cronus' body, a plan was taking shape. A sibling born after him, Zeus, was growing far from the Titan's reach, destined to return and shatter the prison that held them all. Poseidon could not know this, not in words or thought, but he could feel the first cracks forming in the silence, tiny fractures like the earliest break in a long frozen lake. And in that moment, something awakened in him, a longing, a yearning for a world he had never touched, but somehow knew he was meant to shape. The darkness had held him, molded him, whispered to him, but it could not keep them forever. Somewhere beyond this living tomb, a vast and waiting ocean stirred, calling to the god who would one day command it. And though he was silent, the future sea god listened. For the first time, he felt the beginning of a destiny rising within him, like a swell building in deep water, preparing to break. He felt the promise of release growing, like a distant shoreline slowly emerging through mist. When the quiet aftermath of liberation settled, when the world was still trembling from the fall of Cronus, Poseidon stepped into a universe he had only imagined in fragments. Light poured around him like something alive, and for a long moment he could not tell whether the brightness was comforting or overwhelming. After an eternity inside darkness, even freedom carried its own weight. He inhaled existence for the first time, and the world answered with a gentle hum, as though acknowledging a god who had not yet discovered the shape of his purpose. The stories often claim that Poseidon rose beside his brothers as one of three beings destined to divide creation. But stories smooth the edges. They rarely mentioned how fragile he felt then, standing beside Zeus and Hades, both of whom seemed more certain, more grounded, more ready to claim the world before them. Zeus, radiant and ambitious, carried the spark of defiance still burning behind his eyes. Hades, solemn and steady, bore the quiet understanding of suffering and patience. Poseidon, however, stood between them with the faintest tremor in his spirit. For though he had endured the same confinement, he alone had carried dreams of water, the only thing he knew, yet something he had never seen. The brothers looked across the newborn world and recognized its vastness. Mountains stood jagged against the clouds, forests breathed new life, and rivers carved gentle paths across the land. It was beautiful, but also unfamiliar. Poseidon felt the immensity of it tighten around him like an invisible hand, a reminder that power did not immediately grant certainty. While the others spoke of order and dominion, he remained quiet, listening for the subtle pull that might reveal the place he belonged. When the lots were drawn to divide realms, fate placed the sky in the hands of Zeus, the underworld in the grasp of Hades, and the sea in the keeping of Poseidon. Some say the division was random, but destiny rarely moves through chance. As Poseidon accepted his realm, he felt both a deep pull of belonging and the heavy weight of responsibility settle upon him. The ocean was immense, deeper than imagination, wider than myth. It was everything he had sensed in darkness, but infinitely larger, infinitely freer. Yet with that freedom came uncertainty. The sea was not a simple realm. It was restless, shifting, unpredictable. To rule it required more than strength. It required understanding, patience, and the ability to hold both calm and chaos in the same heart. Poseidon wondered whether he possessed such qualities. He wondered whether the shadows of confinement still clung too tightly to him, shaping the way he breathed, the way he saw himself. Zeus noticed the hesitation. With a voice full of confidence, he told his brother that the sea was a realm worthy of greatness, fit for a god whose spirit had been shaped by silence and depth. But Poseidon heard another meaning beneath the encouragement. Zeus believed that power was not something one was born ready to wield, but something one grew into. Hades, meanwhile, offered a subtle nod, a silent gesture of understanding, as though he too knew that the burden of a domain was heavier than any crown. Poseidon descended toward the forming oceans. guided by instinct more than knowledge. The closer he came, the stronger the sensation grew, like a heartbeat responding to an echo. When he touched the water for the first time, the world seemed to exhale. Waves curled toward him, currents shifted, and the deep stirred with ancient recognition. The sea accepted him before he had fully accepted himself. Yet even this acceptance could not silence all doubt. As he looked into the vast blue, he wondered whether he was truly the equal of his brothers. Zeus had claimed the sky with a roar of thunder. Hades could embrace the underworld with solemn purpose. Poseidon, in contrast, stood at the edge of uncertainty, feeling the pull of a realm too large to comprehend. The ocean reflected possibility rather than power, and possibility can be far more intimidating. Still, something within him began to shift. The quiet lessons he had learned in darkness, the patience, the awareness, the ability to listen were not weaknesses. They were tools. Tools that allowed him to sense the subtle rhythms of tides, the whispers of currents, the hidden language within the deep. He was not the weakest of the three. He was simply the one who needed time to grow into the shape of his destiny. And as he stepped deeper into his realm, the water rose to meet him, steady and welcoming. In that moment, Poseidon understood something profound. Greatness does not rise instantly. It moves like a tide, gathering strength in silence until it is ready to break. When the ocean welcomed Poseidon, it did so not with thunder or spectacle, but with a quiet, ancient recognition. The waves curved toward him as though greeting a presence they had long awaited, and the deep stirred as if awakening from a dream. Yet Poseidon felt no surge of triumph. Instead, he felt a trembling mixture of awe and responsibility settle into his chest. Here in the boundless water, he sensed the truth of his destiny, but also the weight of it. The sea held endless secrets, and it had chosen him to hear them. In the early days of the world, when gods still learned the shapes of their own power, the three brothers sought gifts that would define their realms. Zeus received the lightning that split the sky. Hades received the helm of darkness that bent shadows to his will. And Poseidon, quiet and contemplative, approached the ancient craftsmen of the gods, the Cyclopes. These one-eyed beings forged weapons not merely of metal, but of truth, shaping the raw essence of a god into something he could hold. They looked upon Poseidon and saw a stillness in him, deeper than silence. They saw a god shaped by confinement, yet carrying an unbroken spirit. So they forged for him a trident, 3 prongs drawn from the breath of storms, the memory of the deep, and the whisper of untamed tides. Its metal glowed with shifting light, as if it held the pulse of oceans yet unlived. When Poseidon took the trident into his hands for the first time, he felt the world tremble. The sea responded instantly, its surface rippling with a recognition older than creation. The weapon was not a tool, nor a symbol. It was an extension of his essence, the expression of a god who had learned patience in darkness and now sought purpose in depth. Through its prongs, he felt the currents as though they were thoughts. He sensed the movements of distant waters as if they were faint murmurs in a crowded room. The ocean had become his body, and his breath stirred its tides. But power, even in its gentleness, brings fear. Poseidon wondered what the trident expected of him. He wondered whether he deserved a gift born of such profound intention. The sea was vast, and within it slept storms, life, and mysteries that could swallow civilizations. Could he guide such a realm without becoming lost in it? The ocean answered him in small ways at first. A wave curved softly around his feet. A current brushed his hand like a greeting. In these gestures, he sensed reassurance. The sea did not ask for perfection. It asked for presence. It asked him to listen, just as he had listened in the darkness inside Cronus. And so he listened now, this time to the shifting breath of the world. He walked into deeper water, and as he did, the sea began to shape itself around him. Creatures stirred beneath the surface, forms still young, still learning their own shapes. They approached him without fear, drawn to the calm gravity of his presence. Some brushed against him, curious. Others circled him in gentle arcs, as though recognizing him as part of the world they instinctively trusted. He felt something inside him soften at their touch, a quiet reminder that the sea was not only a place of power, but of life. Yet the ocean held more than life. It held memory, an ancient memory that existed before gods and titans. When Poseidon raised his trident, he felt fragments of that memory unfurl around him like drifting petals. He sensed worlds that had risen from water and returned to it. He sensed the stories of vanished shapes, forgotten tides, and creatures that moved like shadows beneath lightless depths. The sea was older than any myth, and by accepting its rule, he had inherited all its unspoken histories. He realized then that ruling the ocean did not mean commanding it. It meant joining it, becoming part of its endless rhythm. The sea could be calm, but it could also be merciless. It could nurture, but it could also reclaim. Poseidon understood that his role was not to tame it, but to coexist with it, to guide its power without silencing its wildness. As he embraced this truth, the ocean shifted. The surface shimmered with growing light, and the sky overhead deepened into a vast expanse of shifting blues. The world felt balanced, even if only for a moment. Poseidon lifted the trident, and with a gentle sweep, he called forth his first tide. The water rose in a slow, graceful swell, cresting like a giant exhale before settling again. It was not a test of power, but a greeting, a way of saying, "I am here." Far above, Zeus watched the horizon brighten with reflected waves. Far below, Hades felt the tremor of new currents vibrating through the roots of the world. Both brothers sensed that Poseidon, though uncertain, had begun to find the shape of his strength. But Poseidon felt something else, a quiet blooming of confidence, fragile yet unmistakable. The trident hummed with energy in his grip, as though acknowledging this shift within him. The god who had once floated helpless in darkness now stood firmly in a realm that answered him with every breath. Yet, even with this growing strength, he remained humble before the ocean. Its vastness did not intimidate him now. It simply reminded him that greatness was a journey. The sea did not ask him to rise in a single tide. It asked him to grow like a deepening current, steady, patient, and unafraid of depth. And so Poseidon stepped farther into the waves, his trident glowing softly in the dimming light. The water rose to meet him, welcoming the god who was learning, moment by moment, to become the master of a realm that stretched beyond imagination. He felt the ocean's quiet approval settle around him like a cloak, and in that serene embrace, he understood this was the beginning of the sea's true voice, and it would speak through him for eternity. The sea did not reveal its secrets all at once. It unfolded itself to Poseidon slowly, like a memory returning in fragments. In the earliest days of his reign, the ocean felt vast beyond comprehension, an endless expanse of shifting depths and wandering currents. At times, he felt as though he were walking through a dream he had once glimpsed in darkness, a dream now turning into a living world. Each new tide brought revelations, soft and cryptic, and Poseidon learned to receive them with patience. The first of these revelations came not from sight, but from feeling. Deep beneath the calm surface, a presence stirred, ancient, slow, and immeasurably old. It was not a creature nor a storm, but something more abstract, the memory of water itself. When Poseidon listened closely, he sensed it whispering stories of the world before gods, of oceans that stretched across the young earth like sleeping giants. These waters had watched continents rise and fall, had held life in their cradle long before the first spark of divinity ever flickered. They carried echoes of the past, and they welcomed Poseidon as their keeper. As he ventured deeper, life began to reveal itself. The creatures of the early sea were strange, their forms shifting as though still deciding what they wanted to become. Some drifted like shadows, translucent and silent. Others glowed with soft, pulsing light, illuminating the depth like wandering stars. They accepted Poseidon without hesitation, sensing the calm gravity of his presence. He watched them with quiet fascination, feeling a tenderness he had never known. In their fragile beauty, he saw reflections of himself, beings shaped by the vastness around them, learning to exist in a world larger than their understanding. But the sea was not only gentle, it held pockets of darkness so ancient and deep they seemed untouched by time. As Poseidon descended into one such abyss, he felt the water grow colder, thicker, as though the ocean itself were holding its breath. In that stillness, he encountered a different kind of memory, one shaped not by life, but by loss. The deep remembered the fall of old creatures, the collapse of forgotten lands, the quiet end of worlds swallowed by shifting tides. These memories did not frighten Poseidon, but they humbled him. They reminded him that even gods were small in the face of such vast, enduring silence. With each journey, Poseidon learned that the ocean was a world of contrasts. It could cradle or devour, soothe or overwhelm. He felt these contradictions within himself as well. At times, he rose with the tides, filled with strength and purpose. And other times, he felt the weight of his responsibility settle like a stone in his chest. The ocean responded to these shifts, mirroring his inner tides. When he doubted, the sea grew still. When he embraced his role, the waves surged with vibrant energy. One day, while exploring the edge of the continental shelf, Poseidon encountered a new wonder, a vast network of coral structures beginning to take shape. These early reefs glowed faintly with life, their colors muted yet mesmerizing. Small creatures darted between their branches, weaving a delicate tapestry of movement. Poseidon knelt beside them, touching the coral gently. It felt warm beneath his fingertips, like a heartbeat. In that moment, he understood that the sea was not just a realm to be ruled. It was a living entity growing beneath his care. His presence shaped the ocean in subtle ways. Currents softened when he passed, and new currents formed where he lingered. Creatures adapted to his energy, becoming more vibrant, more varied. Storms, once wild and unrestrained, learned to bow before him, gathering their strength only when he permitted. The sea was learning him as he learned it, and together they formed an unspoken bond. Yet, amidst this harmony, Poseidon sensed a lingering unease. There were places in the ocean where the water resisted him, where ancient forces stirred with a will independent of his own. In those depths, he felt watched, not with malice, but with curiosity. It was as though the oldest parts of the sea were testing him, determining whether he was worthy of its full truth. Poseidon did not shrink from this challenge. Instead, he approached these places with reverence, offering his presence rather than his power. One such place was a massive underwater cavern, hidden beneath layers of shifting currents. When Poseidon entered, he felt the temperature drop. The silence thickened, and the water pressed against him like a heavy cloak. At the center of the cavern lay a chasm so deep it seemed to pull light into its core. As Poseidon peered into it, he felt the ocean speak, wordlessly, but with undeniable clarity. It told him that some mysteries were not meant to be solved, only respected. That the sea held depths no god could fully claim. Poseidon accepted this truth with grace. Mastery did not mean control. It meant harmony. The sea was not his possession. It was his partner. When he emerged from the cavern, the ocean shimmered with renewed warmth. Schools of fish swirled around him, forming spirals of silver and blue. Light filtered from above in soft beams, illuminating the water like a cathedral. Poseidon felt the sea's approval in every ripple, every current. Poseidon lingered in the glowing water, letting the gentle sway of the currents guide his thoughts. He felt the ocean breathe around him, a slow and steady rhythm that matched the pulse within his own chest. It was a reminder that he and the sea were intertwined now, each shaping the other with every passing moment. The bond deepened quietly. In the quiet expanse of the early sea, as life blossomed and currents grew more certain, Poseidon began to sense something new stirring within the depths. It was not the ancient memory of the ocean, nor the restless pulse of tides. It was something softer, something woven from the fragile threads of connection. Though gods were often shaped by power, Poseidon was shaped equally by stillness, and in that stillness, he discovered the quiet beginnings of attachment. The first to draw his attention was Amphitrite, one of the Nereids, gentle daughters of the sea whose forms seemed to shimmer with the light of distant stars. Amphitrite did not approach Poseidon with awe or fear, as so many beings did. Instead, she regarded him with a serene calm, as though she had always known he would one day walk among the waves. When she moved, the water flowed with her, creating ripples that soothed the god's restless thoughts. Poseidon found comfort in her presence. She spoke little, but her silence carried meaning, a language he recognized from his earliest memories, when they drifted together through kelp forests or watched moonlit beams fracture across the waves. Poseidon felt a warmth blooming in the quiet places of his heart, a warmth he had not realized he could feel. But Amphitrite was not easily claimed. When he first approached her with affection, she retreated into the deeper currents, wary of the weight that came with being close to a god. The ocean whispered its old wisdom. Even love must be patient. So Poseidon waited, letting her see not his power, but his gentleness. Slowly, she returned, and soon they moved through the water in tranquil harmony. Their bond did not roar like storms. It flowed like the steady tide. Yet the sea, expansive as it was, held other stories for Poseidon. Stories of longing, of loss, of echoes he could not silence. There was the nymph who danced along lonely shores, whose laughter rang like chimes in the wind. Poseidon admired her wild spirit, her joy so unlike the deep melancholy of the ocean. But mortal hearts grew restless, and she drifted away like foam carried by the tide. Her absence lingered, a reminder that not all connections endure. There was Medusa, once a priestess whose beauty shone brighter than morning light. Poseidon saw in her not just beauty, but a fierce devotion, a flame that resisted the cold of the world. But their meeting, charged with emotion and desire, took place in Athena's sacred temple, a moment that would twist into tragedy. When Medusa was cursed, Poseidon felt the weight of that sorrow settle deeply within him. The sea carried her grief for ages, echoing it in storms that rolled across the horizon. And there were others, brief glimmers of affection, fleeting as passing waves. Each left an imprint, a soft indentation upon the god who felt more deeply than myths would one day admit. The ocean remembered them all, storing their echoes in its shifting currents. But not every bond brought sorrow. Amphitrite, patient and steady, became a constant presence in Poseidon's realm. With her, the sea felt balanced, as though its endless motions had found a counterpoint. She guided the younger creatures of the deep, her gentle touch shaping the early gardens of coral and kelp. Poseidon watched her with quiet admiration, feeling gratitude ripple through him like a warm current. They shared moments of deep stillness, floating above glowing reefs, resting in shadowed grottos where the ocean hummed its soft lullaby. In these moments, Poseidon felt anchored, no longer adrift in the vastness of his own realm. But even with love beside him, the sea god carried within him a loneliness that no partnership could fully erase. It was a loneliness born from darkness, a remnant of his earliest memories inside Cronus. Sometimes, when the waters grew too calm and the world too quiet, Poseidon felt that old silence return, pressing gently against the edges of his mind. Amphitrite sensed it, though he rarely spoke of it. She comforted him not with words, but with presence, reminding him that even gods with deep wounds could find peace in companionship. As ages passed, Poseidon's understanding of love deepened. He learned that affection did not always heal. Sometimes it revealed wounds that had long been hidden. Sometimes it faded, leaving behind a tender ache. And sometimes it endured, quiet, unshakable, like a reef that holds its shape no matter how many storms pass overhead. The ocean mirrored these truths. Currents converged and parted. Creatures bonded and drifted away. Tides rose and fell in endless cycles. Poseidon realized he could not force the sea into stillness, just as he could not force his heart into certainty. Both were shaped by change, by rhythm, by the delicate dance between closeness and distance. In time, stories of the Poseidon's lovers would spread across the world. Some tales would speak of fury, others of passion, others still of heartbreak. But beneath these stories lay quieter truths, truths the ocean held gently for those who listened closely enough to hear. Poseidon did not seek love for conquest or possession. He sought it because he yearned for connection. The same connection he had longed for in the darkest moments of his early existence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sea glowed with fading gold, Amphitrite drifted to his side. They watched the dying light ripple across the water. Poseidon felt the ocean settle around them, calm and warm. The moment felt suspended in time, unburdened by the past, untouched by the future. In that gentle stillness, the god of the sea understood something profound. Love, like the ocean, was not meant to be held too tightly. It was meant to be experienced, softly, patiently, with reverence for its changing tides. And as the last light slipped beneath the waves, Poseidon felt those tides move within him, steady and sure. The ocean, in all its vastness, echoed the quiet truth he had come to accept, that even in the depths of loss and longing, there was beauty. There was memory. And there was a kind of peace that flowed through him like a sea-fliff, comforting tide. In the vastness of the sea, where silence sleeps beneath miles of water, Poseidon discovered a truth he had long suspected. Power is not a single force, but a collection of shadows and storms within the self. Even in his calmest moments, a quiet tension lived beneath his surface, an echo of the darkness that once confined him. It stirred whenever the ocean throbbed with unrest, whenever distant storms flickered against the horizon. It stirred whenever his heart remembered the weight of solitude. This tension grew as the world of gods and mortals took shape. For while the sea was his sanctuary, it was also a mirror, reflecting not only the serenity he offered it, but the turbulence he tried to bury. Mortals feared the sea's fury, but they did not understand that each storm carried a piece of Poseidon's own unrest. A whisper emotions too vast to name. The first time he felt true anger rise within him, it came not from insult or injury, but from helplessness. A mortal kingdom built too close to the shore had suffered a tragedy, its vessels shattered by a natural current long before Poseidon had learned to sense every shift. The cries of the people echoed through the waters, reaching him like a distant wound. He rushed to quiet the waves, but the damage had already been done. In that moment, Poseidon felt the sting of his limitations. The ocean answered to him, yes, but nature itself moved on a rhythm older than the gods. His frustration rippled through the depths, startling the creatures that had grown accustomed to his gentleness. The current sharpened, storms brewed along distant coasts, and Poseidon realized something painful. The sea responded not only to his intentions, but to his emotions. Every god expressed power through will, but Poseidon expressed it through feeling. His storms were born from the tides within him. This frightened him, for he carried too many tides: love, loss, memory, doubt, and beneath them all, the quiet fury of a god who had once been swallowed by darkness. The remnants of that terror lived inside him like a dormant tremor, waiting for the wrong moment to awaken. When he visited Olympus, these tensions sharpened. Zeus radiated confidence. Hades radiated steady resolve. But Poseidon radiated something more complex. Quiet intensity that others mistook for distance. The gods respected him, yet they never fully understood him. They saw the trident, the waves, the storms he could conjure. They did not see the weight he carried from the moment he had been born into darkness. They did not feel the pressure of an ocean, but stretched endlessly, whispering its memories into him day after day. Conflicts began subtly. A disagreement with Zeus over the nature of storms. A tense silence between him and Hera, who mistrusted his wandering heart. A flicker of resentment from Athena, whose wisdom clashed with his unpredictable seas. These were small things, ripples rather than waves. A Poseidon felt them, and each ripple tugged at the storms beneath his calm. Mortals, too, stirred his anger, not through malice, but through audacity. They built their ships and cities without understanding the sea's hunger. They blamed him for storms that were not his doing, praised him for calm waters he had not touched, and invoked his name with both gratitude and fear. To them, the ocean was a tool. To Poseidon, it was a living thing, sacred and deep. One day, a mortal king boasted that his navy ruled the seas. He declared that no wave dared rise without his command. Poseidon, hearing this through the rippling web of currents, felt a tremor of irritation. Not rage, just a quiet pulse, a reminder of the boundary between reverence and arrogance. When the king's fleet later attempted to cross a violent current without caution, the sea answered with honest force. Ships cracked, oars splintered, and the mortals cried Poseidon's name in fear. Yet the god had done nothing. The ocean was simply being itself. But their cries awakened something in him, a desire to be understood, a desire to be respected, a desire to be seen not as a force to exploit, but as a presence to honor. And so Poseidon's storms grew sharper, not out of cruelty, but out of emotion. When he felt sorrow, the sea dimmed. When he felt longing, the tides reached farther up the shore. When he felt anger, thunder bloomed over distant waters. The greatest test of his restraint came with Odysseus, a mortal whose cunning was both admirable and infuriating. When Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, Polyphemus, the god felt a surge of fury unlike anything since his days in Cronus's darkness. It was not the injury itself, but the disrespect, the refusal to acknowledge the sacred balance between gods and mortals. The storm that followed was born entirely of emotion, a tempest drawn from years of buried tension. Yet even then, Poseidon hesitated. He did not strike with full force. He let the sea challenge Odysseus, but not destroy him. For even in anger, Poseidon understood boundaries. The ocean could crush, but it could also forgive. As time passed, Poseidon sought ways to temper the storms within him. He returned often to the places where the sea was quietest, hidden grottos, still water shallows, trenches where the world fell silent. There he listened to the ocean's memory. It reminded him that power did not need to roar to be real, that depth, not noise, defined strength. Slowly, he learned to breathe with the tides instead of against them, to let his emotions flow rather than break, to release storms only when the world truly needed them. His restraint became something mortals could not understand, but the ocean understood it well. The sea softened when he softened. It raged only when he allowed it to rage. It grew calm when he sought calm within himself. In this balance, Poseidon found a strange kind of peace, a peace born not from quiet, but from acceptance of his storms. In the quiet afterward, as the last tremors of emotion drifted into the deep, Poseidon felt the ocean settle around him with gentle certainty. It reminded him that even the strongest storms pass, leaving the water clearer than before. And in that clearing, he sensed his own spirit steadying, anchored by the lessons carved into every wave. The sea, patient and eternal, welcomed his stillness, holding it like a promise of balance to come. Always. Rivalries do not erupt in a single moment. They grow like slow fissures in stone, widening with each passing season, shaped by misunderstandings, pride, and the quiet distance between two powerful wills. For Poseidon, rivalry was not born from hatred, but from the delicate tension between balance and defiance, between the sea's shifting nature and the world that stood above it. And among all the rivalries that touched his immortal life, two left the deepest marks: Athena's unwavering resolve and Odysseus's relentless cunning. Athena and Poseidon were opposites in almost every way. She was stillness shaped into wisdom. He was motion shaped into depth. She believed in order, strategy, and the precision of the mind. He believed in instinct, emotion, and the unspoken language of the tides. Their differences were not flaws, merely truths, but truths, when placed too close together, sometimes spark. The first spark came when both laid claim to the same mortal city, a place destined to become a cradle of thought, art, and influence. Poseidon offered the gift of water, striking the earth to release a spring. Athena offered the olive tree, promising nourishment, prosperity, and peace. The mortals chose her gift, not because they rejected Poseidon, but because they sought stability over raw power. Yet in the whisper of their voices, In the tilt of their decision, Poseidon felt something shift within him. Not fury, just a quiet ache. The sea was vast, but rejection had a way of echoing, even in depths where no sound should reach. Athena's victory was not a slight, yet Poseidon's pride trembled. Something unspoken grew between them, a tension neither could fully dissolve. Their bond became a tide that swelled and retreated, sometimes peaceful, sometimes strained. They were not enemies. They were forces too different to blend easily, yet too intertwined to drift apart. Each respected the other, even when their paths diverged. But mortals did not always understand the subtleties of gods. To them, rivalry meant conflict, storms, omens, and unpredictable tempests. They built stories around Poseidon's storms, as though every wave struck out of spite, ignoring the truth that the sea has its own pulse, its own moods. Still, Poseidon knew that sometimes a flicker of frustration would spread through the world's waters, a quiet reminder of the wound that never fully healed. Then came Odysseus, the mortal whose name would one day carry the weight of legend. Odysseus was clever in ways mortals rarely were. He tread the boundaries between courage and arrogance with remarkable ease, shaping fate through quick wit and bold decisions. For a time, Poseidon admired him from afar, but admiration turned to tension the moment Odysseus harmed someone dear to the sea god, Polyphemus, Poseidon's son. Polyphemus was no gentle creature. He was wild and untamed, shaped by the roughness of the world. But he was still Poseidon's blood. When Odysseus struck him down and then claimed the victory with pride, Poseidon felt a storm rise within him that shook the very marrow of the ocean. It was not the injury that hurt him most. It was the disrespect, the way Odysseus mocked the gods with his words, believing himself beyond their reach. And so the long struggle began. The sea became a labyrinth for Odysseus, currents shifting, winds twisting, storms forming with quiet intention. Poseidon did not seek to destroy him, for there was no honor in crushing a mortal completely. Instead, he sought to teach him reverence, to show him that cunning alone could not outlast the patience of the sea. Yet even in anger, Poseidon acted with restraint. His storms guided Odysseus, challenged him, tested the edges of his pride, but they never crossed the fine line between lesson and doom. In this way, Poseidon's fury was not destruction, it was discipline. The sea thundered not with hatred, but with solemn purpose. Still, mortals could not see the nuance. They whispered of Poseidon's wrath as though he were ruled by rage, not understanding that even in tempest there was intention. The ocean was a teacher, and its god was no different. As the years passed, Poseidon's rivalry with Odysseus softened. The mortal had endured much, grown wiser, grown weary. Poseidon sensed the change in him through the water's memory, felt the slow erosion of arrogance replaced by humility. When Odysseus finally reached his home, Poseidon allowed the sea to rest, its lesson complete. The waves rolled gently along his shores, not as a threat, but as a quiet farewell. With Athena, the tension endured longer. Their philosophies continued to diverge, their strengths forever intertwined, yet forever distinct. But there were moments, rare and fleeting, when they found harmony, when the sea calmed beneath her sky, when wisdom and depth aligned like stars reflected in water. In those moments, Poseidon sensed the truth. Rivalry was not the opposite of respect. Sometimes it was a form of it. For differences create friction, and friction shapes the world. Still, Poseidon carried the weight of every conflict. In the hush of the deep, he would revisit them. Athena's thoughtful gaze, Odysseus's desperate journey, the fractures between immortals and mortals alike. The sea held these memories as it held all things, letting them drift gently within its currents. But there was one more truth he learned through rivalry, one that became a quiet pillar of his existence. Not all storms come to break. Some come to reveal. Rivalries revealed his depth, his temper, his capacity for restraint. They showed him the boundaries of his godhood, the thin line between justice and vengeance, between guidance and punishment. They taught him to breathe with intention, to release anger with care, to trust the ocean's rhythm rather than the trembling of his own heart. In the end, Poseidon understood that conflict was not a stain upon his nature. It was a facet of it. For the sea itself was contradiction, calm and chaos, beauty and danger, reflection and thunder. And in these contradictions, Poseidon found clarity. He stood upon the shifting floor of the ocean, sensing the quiet pulse of the world above. His rivals were threads in the tapestry of his existence, shaping him as deeply as the trenches and currents that defined his realm. The sea stirred gently around him, not in turmoil, but in calm acknowledgement. The ocean remembered every conflict. It remembered every reconciliation, and it carried them not as burdens, but as truths that made the god who he was. Poseidon breathed, and the water breathed with him, their harmony soft and unbroken. For even in rivalry there is understanding. Even in conflict there is growth, and even in storms there is silence waiting to return. He felt the sea settle with him, holding the echoes of Athena's wisdom, Odysseus's resilience, and the quiet strength born from every struggle. These memories shaped the depths like hidden currents, guiding him toward the next chapter of his eternal life. Immortality is often imagined as a crown, glittering, enviable, untouched by time. But for Poseidon, immortality was a weight that rested over him like the pressure of the deepest trenches. The sea moved in endless cycles, yet those cycles only reminded him of the stillness within his own eternity. Waves rose and fell, creatures lived and died, civilizations emerged, flourished, and vanished like fleeting metals. But he remained always. There were moments when this constancy felt like solace. The ocean's rhythm lulled him, its timeless whisper telling him that he was part of something eternal, something beyond the fragile arcs of mortal lives. But there were nights, long, quiet nights beneath a moonlit surface, when Poseidon felt the sharp edges of his solitude more acutely than the sting of any storm. For immortality is not merely the absence of death. It is the slow accumulation of memory. Poseidon remembered everything. He remembered his birth in darkness. He remembered the first spark of fear, the first taste of freedom, the first whisper of the ocean calling to him. He remembered every love, every loss, every storm that rose within him and faded into calm. These memories rested in him like sediments layering the sea floor, heavy, ancient, unmoving. Mortals came and went, each leaving a faint impression upon the world, but their brevity created a distance Poseidon could never cross. They lived with urgency, as though each moment were a flame threatening to burst or fade. Poseidon admired that urgency. He envied it at times. Immortality made patience easy, but it also made meaning slippery. When one has endless centuries, the value of a single moment can blur. There were times when he tried to step into mortal pace, watching villages grow, guiding sailors across gentle waters, listening to their prayers. But each time he grew fond of a generation, it eventually dissolved into memory, leaving behind echoes that tugged at him in quiet hours. Even the gods did not escape this distance. Zeus thundered with ambition, always hungry for the next challenge. Hades retreated into the underworld, content with silence, but bound to its shadowed halls. Poseidon existed somewhere between them, neither driven nor withdrawn, but drifting in a long, contemplative tide. It was during one such tide that he began to sense the true weight of eternity. The sea, which had always comforted him, started to feel too familiar. Its currents no longer surprised him. Its storms no longer challenged him. The same patterns repeated until they blurred together. Immortality removed the thrill of discovery, leaving behind only a lingering ache for something new, something impossible. He wandered to the edges of the world, to places untouched even by the gods. He explored trenches deeper than mortal imagination, listened to the secrets of volcanic vents, watched creatures evolve in slow, wondrous transformations. But even these marvels, once so captivating, began to feel like verses of a song he had long since memorized. The loneliness did not roar. It whispered. It whispered when he stood upon quiet shores and watched children play in the surf, knowing he would look upon countless such scenes over endless ages. It whispered when sailors sang hymns to him, believing he watched over them personally, unaware that he had heard the same prayers spoken in countless tongues through countless centuries. It whispered when storms gathered without his command, reminding him that the world continued to shape itself with or without his presence. In the softest moments, Poseidon envied mortals their ending, the way a finite life could bloom with intensity. But envy did not corrupt him. It humbled him. It reminded him that while he could not live as they did, he could still protect the fragile beauty of their existence. And so he became a quiet guardian. He calmed storms that would have broken them. He guided lost travelers with gentle tides. He allowed fishermen safe passage in times of famine. He listened to their stories as they spoke to the waves, hoping their God heard them. He did. Yet even in this act of protection, the weight remained. Immortality forced him to watch as the world changed in ways he could not predict. Coastlines shifted, cultures rose and crumbled, myths about him twisted into new shapes, some reverent, some misguided, some strange enough to make him smile beneath the waves. He endured through all of it, a silent witness to the world's constant evolution. But beneath that endurance lay an ache, a longing not for mortality, but for connection that could last longer than a breath in eternity. Amphitrite eased that ache at times. Her presence was a calm tide against his restless thoughts. But even companionship could not erase the truth. The ocean was infinite, that so was his solitude. One day, as Poseidon drifted through a vast plain of underwater sand, he felt something shift, something subtle yet undeniable. The currents carried a faint vibration, a memory rising from the depths of the past. It was his own voice, echoed from centuries earlier, a vow he had once spoken quietly into the dark. I will endure, for the ocean endures. At the time, it had comforted him. Now it felt like both a promise and a burden. Immortality meant carrying every version of himself. His younger hope, his older sorrow, his shifting tempers, his lingering regrets. All of them lived inside him like layers of tide. He realized then that eternity was not something to conquer. It was something to navigate, just as he navigated the ever-changing sea. And in that realization, he found a strange peace. He returned to the surface, letting moonlight ripple across his face. The world had grown again, new lands forming, old lands sinking, new stars being charted by mortal astronomers who did not know their God watched them with quiet curiosity. Perhaps meaning did not fade in immortality. Perhaps meaning evolved. He looked across the water, and the sea seemed to breathe with him. For in the end, immortality did not separate him from the world. It anchored him to it. He was the memory of the ocean, the witness of ages, the quiet heartbeat beneath every tide. The ocean carried his thoughts gently, as though cradling each one within its ancient pulse. In the drifting quiet, Poseidon understood that eternity was not measured by years, but by the depth of awareness one found within them. Mortals lived brief lives, yet filled them with meaning through urgency. Gods lived endless lives, yet found meaning through reflection. Both paths were different expressions of the same truth, that existence itself was a gift to be witnessed, shaped, and honored. And as he drifted farther into the calm expanse of night, he felt the sea draw closer, embracing him with a softness only the oldest waters could offer. It was a reminder that the ocean did not need him to change. It needed him simply to be. In the quiet that followed centuries of storms, Poseidon found himself drifting through a gentler sea. The ruins of Atlantis lay far behind him now, softened by coral, wrapped in silence, embraced by the slow patience of the deep. For the first time in ages, he felt no pull to look back. Grief had settled into something quieter, something almost tender, a dim light that no longer flickered with pain, only memory. The ocean around him moved with a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat half asleep. It carried no urgency, no protest, no trembling of distant warnings. Only calm, only the hush of a realm learning to breathe again. Poseidon let the currents guide him without thought, his body drifting as though he were only another piece of the sea, something ancient, carried by something older still. He had watched civilizations rise and crumble, watched shorelines reshape themselves, watched mortals discover wonder and forget it and rediscover it again. Through all of it, he had felt the ache of eternity, a weight of memory pressing upon him like water in the deepest trench. Yet in this quiet, he felt that weight ease. not vanish, but soften, the way a tide withdraws from the shore before finding its balance. He moved through fields of swaying kelp, each blade brushing against him like a whisper. Tiny fish darted through the drifting fronds, their movements playful, unburdened. He envied their simplicity, the way they lived wholly in the moment, untouched by the gravity of remembrance. For a fleeting instant, he wondered if he too could learn to exist that lightly, at least in these rare pockets of stillness. The sea here hummed a low, soothing song, one that vibrated gently against his chest. It was a song older than language, older than gods, older even than the first stirring of life in the primordial dark. It spoke of cycles, of loss and renewal, of endings that give way to quiet, and quiet that gives way to beginnings. Poseidon listened, letting the melody wash through him like a tide smoothing rough sand. He thought of Atlantis then, not with sharp sorrow, not with the sting of regret, but with a melancholy affection. The memories drifted through him like soft shadows, the gleaming towers, the laughter in its markets, the way its people once looked to the sea with reverence. He remembered their joy, their brilliance, their devotion. He remembered their fall. But now in this gentle quiet, he saw the fullness of their existence, not just the tragedy that closed it. Even beauty must fade, the sea whispered. And in fading, it changes us. Poseidon felt that truth settle through him like settling sediment. Slow, steady, inevitable. Atlantis had shaped him just as the ocean shaped stone, carving new contours, deepening old ones, smoothing edges he had not known were sharp. Through their rise, he had learned pride. Through their fall, he had learned humility. Through their memory, he learned the soft ache of loving something impermanent. He drifted deeper into the dim blue, where sunlight dissolved into dusk. Here, the water held an almost sacred stillness. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing disturbed the peace. Even Poseidon's presence blended into the quiet, as though the sea itself wished to soothe him. He allowed his eyes to close, feeling the weight of ages loosen, sealing the endless churn of memory slow to a more bearable rhythm. For a long while, he simply existed. No storms, no regrets, no gods demanding allegiance, no mortals crying prayers into the wind. Only the sea, vast, calm, and breathing softly around him. He thought of his brothers, distant in their own realms. Zeus with his relentless ambition, Hades with his somber quiet. They carried burdens of their own. But Poseidon wondered if either of them truly understood the strange loneliness of eternity spent in motion. The sea was never still, not fully. It lived, shifted, evolved without pause. In guiding it, he had forgotten how to rest. But now, in this quietest corner of the ocean, rest found him. He felt the currents cradle him, gentle as a mother holding a child. He felt the pressure of the deep wrap around him like a blanket, steady and constant. He felt the ocean's ancient song rise and fall, lulling him into a state he had rarely known, peace without vigilance. Memories continued to drift through him, but they no longer demanded anything. They simply existed beside him, like shadows cast by a soft light. They came without sharpness, without weight, without the old echoing ache. He realized slowly that this was the gift the sea had been trying to offer him for ages. The permission to let go, not of memory, but of the pain woven into it. Loss, after all, was not a wound meant to stay open. Even oceans heal. Poseidon breathed deeply, though he did not need breath. The motion was symbolic, a release, a surrender. He let Atlantis drift away into the dark. Not erased, but placed carefully among the many memories the sea held for him. Its glow dimmed, but did not disappear. Nothing truly disappeared here. It only softened. He opened his eyes. The water around him shimmered faintly, as though reflecting a light that did not exist. Perhaps it came from him, or perhaps it came from the ocean, offering comfort in its own ancient way. Poseidon felt himself sink into that comfort, into that softness, into that long-awaited stillness. The sea, in its endless wisdom, whispered one final truth. Even gods must rest. Poseidon closed his eyes once more, allowing the ocean to hold him. The currents rocked him gently, carrying him deeper into a quiet where time lost its edge, and eternity felt less like a weight and more like a slow, soothing tide. And in that drifting calm, where sorrow softened into memory and memory softened into peace, Poseidon finally found what he had not known he needed: a place to be still.